Key points: genocide and ecocide in Gaza. The ongoing conflict in Gaza, now recognized as genocide by the International Court of Justice, has not only caused immense human suffering but also led to severe environmental destruction, termed ecocide by some experts. Environmental impact. Gaza's ecosystem, including its biodiversity, marine life, and agricultural land, has been severely damaged due to military operations. The destruction of trees, including olive groves, deforestation, soil contamination, and water pollution, threatens the region's future habitability and food security. Public health crisis. Bombings have damaged water infrastructure, mixing sewage with drinking water, which, along with poor waste management, has led to an increase in diseases. Contaminated water used for irrigation could introduce harmful substances into the food chain, further threatening public health. Social and economic consequences. The environmental degradation has led to a public health emergency and significant social and economic impacts, including loss of livelihoods and worsening poverty. The crisis threatens displacement and social instability in neighboring areas as living conditions deteriorate. Legal and ethical accountability. The scale of environmental damage in Gaza raises questions about accountability under international law. Ecocide, though not officially recognized in legal frameworks, is being discussed as a crime that could hold perpetrators accountable for environmental destruction during armed conflict. The authors suggest the OIC, Organization of Islamic Cooperation, should seek UN action to prosecute Israeli leadership for these crimes. Crux. The ongoing war in Gaza has caused not only a human rights catastrophe, but also widespread environmental destruction. Termed ecocide, this environmental damage has serious long-term implications for the region's ecosystem, public health, and economic stability. The international community is being urged to hold the perpetrators accountable, with suggestions to prosecute those responsible under the charge of ecocide. Key points: erosion of livelihoods. The article highlights the severe impact of inflation and economic degradation on the livelihoods of Pakistani citizens. Over the last 5 years, inflation has drastically reduced purchasing power, with salaries and rupee-based assets losing significant value. Disconnect between citizens and the state. The growing discontent is not just a result of legal and constitutional rollbacks, but also the economic hardships faced by the population. This economic strain is leading to a breakdown in the connection between citizens and the state, as people seek alternative ways to cope, such as turning to homeopaths, faith healers, and speculative financial schemes. Impact on society and behavior. The article explores how this economic distress has changed social behavior. It notes increased stress and transactional attitudes in educational settings, with students treating education as a commodity due to financial pressure. The growing number of people resorting to informal, non-rational support systems also makes the population more susceptible to conspiracy theories, disinformation, and mob behavior. Vicious economic cycle. The government's increasing demands on citizens through higher taxes or eroded incomes are exacerbating the situation. This cycle of economic stress and growing dissatisfaction is unlike previous crises in Pakistan, as more people are rejecting the system. Need for dialogue. The article argues that coercion and repression are not viable solutions. Instead, the government needs to engage in dialogue with the populace and reconnect with their needs to address the current crisis. Crux. The economic crisis in Pakistan, marked by historic inflation and a steep decline in living standards, is driving a deeper disconnect between the state and its citizens. This disconnection is reflected not just in the rollback of rights, but in the erosion of livelihoods, leading to irrational social behaviors and a breakdown in trust. The solution lies not in repression, but in dialogue and addressing the economic and social needs of the people. Key points: IMF's relationship with Pakistan. Pakistan has repeatedly sought financial assistance from the IMF, marking its 25th bailout with a new $7 billion loan under a 37-month extended arrangement. Despite the history of unmet promises, Pakistan continues to rely on IMF support, with fresh assurances and promises of economic reforms. Recurring bailouts. The article criticizes Pakistan's repeated bailouts, likening the situation to an addict seeking more financial relief soon after a previous bailout. Despite the promises made by Pakistan's leadership, The IMF has remained skeptical due to the country's past inability to follow through on economic reforms. IMF's conditions. The new IMF program includes stringent reforms such as bringing undertaxed sectors like retail, agriculture, and real estate into the tax regime and reducing exemptions for privileged sectors. This is expected to challenge the Federation's unity, as reforms will test public patience and patriotic sentiments. IMF's concerns and global tensions. The IMF expresses concerns over Pakistan's political structure and vested interests that could obstruct the reform process. The IMF also notes the role of international players like China, highlighting Pakistan's heavy debt obligations to China. There's uncertainty about China's continued financial support given the shifting global dynamics, especially with the upcoming U.S. elections. U.S. election implications. The article speculates that the outcome of the U.S. presidential election could impact Pakistan's financial relationship with the IMF and its allies. Both Donald Trump and Kamala Harris are mentioned, with the latter's potential Indian roots being suggested as a possible factor influencing U.S.-Pakistan relations. The future burden on youth. The article closes with a sobering note about the national debt that future generations will inherit, emphasizing the lasting consequences of the current economic mismanagement. Crux. Pakistan's repeated reliance on IMF bailouts, despite its history of unmet promises, highlights its unsustainable economic practices. The latest $7 billion loan comes with strict conditions that will test the country's ability to reform. Global players, particularly China and the U.S., are crucial to Pakistan's financial future, with the upcoming U.S. election potentially influencing future support. The heavy debt burden will ultimately be borne by future generations. Key points. Human rights challenges in Pakistan. Pakistan faces significant human rights issues affecting women, minorities, and children, often due to entrenched power structures. Despite the government's international commitments, marginalized groups continue to suffer from systemic violations. International commitments. Pakistan has ratified 7 core UN human rights treaties, including the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, ICCPR. These treaties impose concrete obligations on the government to uphold civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights. Upcoming ICCPR review. On October 17, 2024, Pakistan's human rights record, specifically regarding civil and political rights under the ICCPR, will be reviewed by the UN Human Rights Committee. The review is critical for assessing Pakistan's progress and commitment to these obligations. National Commission for Human Rights, NCHR. The NCHR plays a crucial role in promoting human rights and resolving cases, having addressed over 7,900 cases. However, systemic challenges persist, and further reforms are necessary to enforce existing human rights legislation effectively. Violence against women. Violence against women remains a serious issue, with 23% of married women reporting physical abuse and 26% facing emotional abuse. Legal and law enforcement systems are insufficient, and patriarchal norms hinder justice, with only 18% of reported rape cases reaching court. Religious minorities. Religious minorities face violence, discrimination, and misuse of blasphemy laws. By mid-2024, 705 people had been jailed under these laws. Forced conversions, especially of Hindu girls, remain a pressing concern, with weak law enforcement leaving minorities vulnerable. Torture and law enforcement issues. Torture and ill treatment by law enforcement persist despite the Torture and Custodial Death Act, 2022. Inhumane prison conditions, overcrowding, and lack of medical care further compound the suffering of detainees, many of whom are pre-trial. Urgent reforms needed. Pakistan must take decisive action to improve the conditions of women, minorities, and incarcerated individuals. Human rights obligations should not be mere formalities, but reflect a genuine commitment to dignity and justice for all. Crux. Pakistan faces deep-rooted human rights challenges, particularly affecting women, minorities, and those in detention. Despite international commitments, enforcement remains weak. The upcoming UN review of Pakistan's human rights record under the ICCPR emphasizes the need for urgent reforms to ensure that the rights of all citizens are protected and respected. The NCHR continues to advocate for meaningful change, but the government must move from rhetoric to action to fulfill its human rights obligations. Key points. SCO Heads of Government Summit in Islamabad. The summit concluded successfully, highlighting Pakistan's commitment to multilateralism and its role in Eurasian connectivity. It reaffirmed Pakistan's readiness to engage in global forums after a challenging period. Main themes of the summit. The summit covered a wide range of topics, including commerce, environmental concerns, and cultural exchanges, with a focus on increasing cooperation among SCO member states. Significant efforts were discussed regarding the establishment of the SCO Development Bank and increasing the use of national currencies for settlements. Anti-Western sentiment. The joint communiqué contained indirect criticism of Western sanctions and the dominance of the dollar in international trade, with SCO members expressing the need for alternative economic structures and currencies. Pakistan's role. Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif highlighted key global concerns, including the impact of climate change and the situation in Afghanistan and Gaza. He stressed the need for regional stability and economic cooperation for growth. Challenges of realizing SCO vision. Implementing the goals discussed in the summit, such as establishing a common bank and enhancing connectivity, requires cooperation from diverse bureaucracies and governments across the region, making it a challenging but attainable task. Significance for Pakistan. The summit demonstrated Pakistan's ability to host multilateral events and its intent to strengthen ties with Eurasian neighbors for economic growth. This is particularly crucial for Pakistan, which cannot afford regional isolation. Global relevance of the SCO. The article suggests that rather than viewing the SCO as part of bloc politics, it should be seen as a positive platform for countries to collaborate in pursuit of common objectives, especially in a fragmented and conflict-ridden world. Crux. The successful conclusion of the SCO Heads of Government Summit in Islamabad signals Pakistan's readiness to re-engage with the world and play a key role in regional multilateralism. The summit emphasized regional connectivity, economic cooperation, and alternatives to Western financial dominance. While realizing these ambitious goals will be difficult, Pakistan's participation is vital for its economic and geopolitical integration within the region. Platforms like the SCO offer hope for collaboration amid global fragmentation. Key points. Tajir Dos Scheme's poor response. The government's voluntary tax documentation scheme for retailers, the Tajir Dos Scheme, has garnered a disappointing response, with only Rs 1 million collected in the first quarter of FY25, far below the Rs 10 billion target. IMF requirements and tax base expansion. The scheme is part of the government's broader commitment to raise tax collection from 9.5% to 13% of GDP over the next 3 years, under the conditions of the $7 billion IMF loan. The IMF requires Pakistan to collect Rs 50 billion in FY25 through this initiative. Challenges in retailer compliance. The scheme, aimed at taxing retailers based on store size, location, and sales, has only attracted around 50,000 registrations. The government's reluctance to penalize non-compliant traders highlights the political influence of the retail sector and weak tax enforcement by the Federal Board of Revenue, FBR. Failure to target powerful sectors. The FBR's focus on existing taxpayers rather than undertaxed sectors, retail, agriculture, exports, and influential business lobbies further underscores the inefficacy of tax enforcement. The government's inability to tax sectors that benefit from significant exemptions exacerbates Pakistan's economic crisis. Consequences of poor tax collection. Pakistan's failure to improve its tax performance is a core reason for its ongoing financial crises, ballooning debt, and inability to invest in infrastructure and social services. The IMF's monitoring of the FBR's efforts will be critical in determining the success of the bailout program. Crux. The government's Tajir Dos scheme to document and tax retailers has failed to generate substantial revenue, reflecting weak enforcement and political resistance. Pakistan's low tax collection, particularly from undertaxed sectors, remains a key challenge in addressing its financial crises. The IMF's bailout success hinges on the FBR's ability to meet its tax goals and expand the tax base, which remains elusive amidst powerful business lobbies and inadequate government action. Key points. Alleged rape incident in Lahore. An alleged rape of a student at a private college in Lahore has caused confusion and controversy. No FIR has been filed, no victim has come forward, but social media and student protests have amplified the issue. A security guard has been arrested, though the college administration denies the incident. Conflicting responses. The Punjab Education Minister has expressed support for the students and called for an investigation if the college is guilty. However, other officials, after reviewing CCTV footage and hospital records, claim no rape occurred. The chief minister has gone as far as to call the allegations politically motivated, adding to the confusion. Call for impartial inquiry. In light of the confusion and conflicting statements, the article urges for an impartial and transparent investigation. This should involve not only government officials, but also civil society and human rights organizations to ensure public trust in the process. The investigation should address the concerns of both sides, including the alleged tampering of video evidence and the police's harsh response to peaceful protests. Broader issue of sexual assault. The article stresses that regardless of the outcome of this specific case, sexual assault and harassment are real issues faced by many Pakistani women. Therefore, the students' protests should not be dismissed as mere political conspiracies, but understood as a legitimate expression of concern over a potential crime. Crux. The alleged rape incident at a Lahore college has triggered widespread protests and conflicting narratives, with no clear resolution in sight. To prevent further social unrest and restore public confidence, an impartial and transparent inquiry is urgently needed. This investigation must consider all aspects, including allegations of evidence tampering, and ensure the participation of civil society to guarantee fairness. Regardless of the outcome, the situation highlights the ongoing issue of sexual violence in Pakistan, which cannot be overlooked or dismissed.